Hello, everybody, and welcome to the third Fathers for Pixels YouTube panel session. My name is Anusha Kandasivam. I'm your moderator for this session. Through Fathers for Pixels YouTube panel sessions, the Pixel Project is providing a platform and learning resource for fathers across the world to step up and speak out about the importance of combating violence against women. For our inaugural series this year, we are collaborating with Men Challenging and Fathering Together. These are two organizations comprising men who are working towards a more equitable and violence-free world for women and girls by actively addressing sexism, misogyny, and toxic masculinity among their male peers. This June's Fathers for Pixel campaign features 12 fathers from Asia, Europe, and North America. Each Livestream YouTube session will feature 3 fathers discussing a topic that links fatherhood and how dads can help stop violence against women in their families, in their communities, and in their cultures. Each session will also include a live moderated Q&A session for dads and communities to ask questions. So today we present to you our third Fathers for Pixels panel session, Empowering Daughters, Parenting Girls Without Sexism, because empowering women and girls is a vital part of efforts to eradicate violence against women. So here we have our panel. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Here to take part in the discussion are 3 fathers who have spent years working in one capacity or another to eradicate violence against women and to advocate for more positive masculinity and a more gender equitable world. So let's start with Bernardo. Bernardo Rosa Rodrigues is Portuguese and lives in Brussels in Belgium. He loves spending time with his children, and other than contributing to the Pixel Project as part of our research and Twitter tag teams, he's also very active in his kids' school and in a number of initiatives to make Brussels a greener and more pleasant city. Bernardo works in public affairs. And then we have George Ivan Maertens Aramayo, who is known as Ivan. He's Bolivian-American, raised in Washington Heights, Manhattan, and he's very tall. He's 6'6", and he played basketball and professionally in the US and professionally overseas. While studying psychology in UNCG, he played college volleyball too. Currently, he works with Fathering Together to support men struggling with mental wellness. He was a father to 3 daughters, but lost one at birth and another recently to violence. Currently, he's raising his youngest daughter, who is 17 years old. And finally, we have Dr. Kyle Ashlee, who his research interests include fatherhood, college men and masculinities, and critical whiteness studies in higher education. He has authored several peer-reviewed journals, book chapters, and an award-winning book. Kyle has developed and led educational programs at colleges and universities around the world, including award-winning College Men and Masculinities initiatives, Men and Masculinities academic classes, and a College Men and Masculinities professional organization. He currently serves as chair of the Coalition on Men and Masculinities within ACPA, College Educators International. Okay, so before we get to the discussion, just one more thing. You, the audience, who are watching can participate as well. You may ask the panel questions. Just make sure you're logged on to your YouTube account so you can type your questions into the chat box that you can see on the right-hand side of your screen. And Regina, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me, and I'll read them out to the panel to answer. All right. So let's get on to the discussion. Let me lead you in. So a father is usually the first male role model in a person's life, and fathers do have a significant impact on their daughter's self-confidence and expectations of behaviors of men and their view of what a healthy relationship with a male person in their life looks like, as they do on their son's attitude towards women and girls. When women are educated and have autonomy over every aspect of their lives, gender-based violence may well begin to recede, and parents, including fathers, play a crucial part in preparing their daughters to confront and navigate the patriarchal world, even while feminists and feminist allies continue to battle to build a more gender equitable and less violent world for women and girls on all fronts, from the workplace to political spaces to home. This is especially crucial in today's world. There has been a major backlash against global women's human rights. In fact, in March this year, the UN Development Programme published the findings of their first Gender Social Norm Index, which analyzed data from 75 countries. Some of the shocking numbers reported include the finding that 9 out of 10 people are biased against women, and that 1/3 of men and women believe that it is acceptable for a man to beat his wife. So, with that in mind, Let's begin today's discussion. My first question is about raising daughters. Raising daughters without sexism and as equals to their male peers is a very challenging prospect for parents in today's world. We still live in a highly gendered world where many societies, especially conservative ones, use tradition and culture to justify and enforce double standards according to the gender binary. One set of standards for boys and men, and a far more restrictive and punitive one for women and girls, where there are an arsenal of belittling language to put girls in their place if they show leadership capabilities, where women are still paid less than men for doing the same work, where pop culture dictates unachievable feminine beauty ideals. So, as a father, what kind of effects do you see or have you seen this having on girls, on your family and community? Shall we start with Ivan?
Sure. So some of the effects that I've seen on girls in my family and in the community is the belief that a girl should learn by a certain age certain things. And supposedly, for example, at age 10, a girl should learn how to cook before learning how to be responsible with a monthly allowance. So that's just one of the things that I see as a quick example.
Okay, Bernardo?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's along the same lines as well. Also coming from a certain heritage in Portugal in terms of traditional families, expectations and sort of standards and the way it's always been. Obviously, this sort of I don't think my daughters were exposed to that, but it's still very much the environment I grew up in. And in family gatherings, it's still the case that you tend to see at some point women going to the kitchen and the man staying in the living room, and you sort of it's obviously something you grew up with, but it's also something that you want to be aware of and hopefully have some conversations about it with people around you, of course.
Kyle, do you see the same thing happening?
Yeah. I don't know. For me, it's hard to tell because my daughter's still so young. So she just turned 20 months yesterday. And so a lot of this for me still seems a little theoretical. But of course, all this stuff happens from the day they're born and even before that, right? During pregnancy, you start to get gifts that are in pink and blue and reinforcing all these different gender stereotypes. And we try to have conversations with family members and friends early on about our preferences, telling people that we want gender neutral things. And to be honest, for the most part, people have been pretty receptive to those requests. We're doing our best to kind of get out of the way. My daughter has lots of different preferences at this point. She seems to be liking pink a lot these days, but she also really likes trucks and construction sites. And so like I said, we're trying to get out of her way and not force our own perspectives on what she should like and what she shouldn't like, to just kind of let her be the person that she's going to become. But again, with family, it can be difficult. So we have an intergenerational household, and her grandmother lives with us. And like I said, we've had conversations about our preferences with family members and with her grandmother. And like I said, most of the time very respectful, but at the same time, she comes from a different generation. And so what comes naturally to her is just, doing girly things when she hangs out with my daughter, painting her nails and playing with scarves and all that. And I think at first I felt really conflicted about that. Like I didn't want her to do those things with my daughter because I didn't want her to enforce those traditionally feminine stereotypes on my daughter. But the more I see her with her grandma, the more I realize that will be sort of a feminine influence that she gets from her grandma, and then she'll get different kind of influences from me and different kind of influences from her mom. And it's good for her to have lots of different kinds of influences. And so we're trying to kind of let up our grip in terms of trying to control everybody's input into her life and just get out of the way and let her have her own preferences.
Mm-hmm. Ivan, have you faced what are some of the difficulties that you have faced when you try to empower and support your daughters and clash with cultural norms at the same time?
Well, some of the difficulties I faced in these years to empower and support my daughters and things that clashed. I pertained to the PTSA. So most people here in North America will know, but for the rest of our audience, PTSA is a Parent Student Teacher Association. So it's basically a parental group that meets once a month. Teachers come to it, other parents come to it, and it's basically a way of parents communicating with the teachers what the parental community wants to see or happen at the school. It is a female-dominated organization. And I've been president for 5 years, vice president for 4 years. So going to all these organizations, and there are national meetings, there are local meetings, there are state meetings. So you get to meet with state representatives, governors, and every once in a while, I would probably say almost once a month, I would get a question like, "Oh, well, what does your wife think about this?" Or and it's just like, doesn't matter what my wife thinks. So that's some of the pushback, some of the clashes that I get when I'm trying to set a norm. And the thing about it is that I bring my daughters to these, or I brought my daughters to these meetings so that they can see, how processes work, how basically our rules of engagement go on, and how I interact with other leaders as well, which is giving them the knowledge and the power. So for me to go to the PTSA wasn't so much for me as it was for my daughters to see how I interact with others in leadership roles.
Okay, that's very interesting, the kind of reaction that you got. I mean, to me, it's interesting because that's the kind of reaction women get all the time. What does your husband think? Yeah. Bernardo, the same question for you. Any difficulties that you face?
I mean, perhaps I'm more in an international environment, perhaps more progressive. You might want to frame it that way. And so I don't perhaps have that backlash. It was funny hearing Ivan describe his experience, because I'm also the president of the Parents Association in my girls' school. I don't get that sort of reaction, at least not to me, in my face, between them, parents between them would question that, but I don't think so. I think, and so perhaps the environment is a bit different. It's perhaps more open. But I mean, you still have to some extent, to deconstruct a little bit these expectations. And when Kyle was talking earlier about the pink and those sort of how do you manage that? I think I'm very much along. On the same wavelength, and I think one way I found of addressing that is sort of turning the stereotypes on their heads. So yes, my daughters love to paint nails and to put makeup on, so I'll do it with them. And so they see that it's stuff that they like to do, but it's not necessarily a purely feminine thing. And I do it because I have fun with it as well. So I don't mind at all. Well, not all the time, but yes. But so I think it's interesting when these kind of tensions come up, that you sort of turn them on their heads, and you sort of, if you cannot, it's a bit of a case of if you cannot fight them straight on, then you sort of flip it on its head and you approach it from a different direction. So yes, they might love pink at some point, and you're not going to take the toys away because they're pink. So you flip it and you introduce other stuff. And one of the things I see is indeed when you go into a shop and you want to find something nice for your kids, pajamas or whatever, all the cool stuff seems to be on the boys' end. So I always end up going to get the superheroes pajamas from the boys section, because otherwise you get unicorns, and they like that as well. But after the third pajamas of unicorns, you kind of want to go, well, let's try something else. And they also watch cartoons with the other heroes, so let's get them that as well. So I think there are different ways that you can subtly approach these stereotype things and sort of trying to introduce them and to make them think about them, not necessarily just by sitting them down and having a chat with them, but by introducing them in ways that perhaps they're not expecting it,
Okay, that's interesting. It's interesting to hear how I guess different cultures have different types of sexism going on, and but there is sexism embedded in most societies, most if not all societies, and it takes many forms in different cultures. For example, women eating separately from men after the men have eaten, women not being allowed in certain public spaces, women only being allowed to take certain jobs. Do you feel that it's important to talk to your daughters about these kind of things, or do you prefer to only teach them or start teaching them first about the big issues like domestic violence or sexual violence? Kyle.
Sure. Yeah.
Ivan? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Sorry, Kyle. Yeah.
Sure, I can go. Yeah, no, I think it's really important for me as a father and for us as parents in our family to talk about this stuff every day. And like I said, our daughter is really young still, so having just like a direct conversation about sexism, there's only so much that she's probably going to understand about that. So when we do start to have conversations with her about that, at this point, it's really mostly for us as her parents, kind of setting a precedent in our home that we talk about these things, and that it's not strange or weird to talk about patriarchy and sexism. And for our daughter right now, one of the big ways that happens is through books. So she loves to read. She's got a million board books in the house, and she's always wanting to go through one at every point of the day. And we picked up this book at the library that characterizes Old MacDonald's farm. So it's that song, Old MacDonald Had a Farm. And the reason why we got it is because she also, in addition to loving to read, she loves to sing. Like, as long as she's singing or someone is singing to her, she is happy. She couldn't be happier. So we got the book because she likes the song and she likes to sing. So I didn't even really flip through the book before we got home. But once we got home and I started reading it, within the first few pages, I realized that the storyline of Old MacDonald is a little different than just like having animals on the farm. So this one starts off with Old MacDonald having a wife, and that they are kissing in the story. And then the story ends with them having a child together. And I actually brought it with me to show you all. So this is the book, Old MacDonald Had a Farm.
Okay.
And let's see. So here is the page with Old MacDonald and his wife. And one of the things that you can tell right away about this book is that Old MacDonald is, well, old. He's an old guy, and his partner there doesn't quite look as old as he does. And so it's this really interesting message, I think, about the purpose and place of women in the lives of men, and how this character in the book is really just around to be pretty and to have children for Old MacDonald. And again, my daughter is very young, and she probably doesn't understand all these different dynamics in the book. But if we had bookshelves full of books that had this kind of messaging in it, then over time it might have an impact on our daughter. And so, I will say that the publishing industry in terms of children's books has come a long way since I was a little kid, I think. And so it's much easier to find books out there that have really positive messages about women's empowerment and girls' empowerment and social justice, diversity. I mean, just the characters in children's books today, as opposed to when I was a kid, is just it's remarkably different. And of course, there's still a lot of children's literature out there that has problematic and troubling messaging. And so I think for us, instead of trying to avoid all of those books and only get the good books, it's sort of doing what Bernardo said and just trying to turn it on its head and say, okay, well, we've got this book. It's got some stuff in it that obviously she likes. She likes to sing the song, but it's got some stuff in it that we don't really like, and it might be worth talking about. So after we read that book, we have a conversation about, what was it like to read about that wife in Old MacDonald's farm? And do you think she does anything else on the farm besides having babies? And, how do you think her and Old MacDonald met, and just conversations like that, and just trying to unpack it a little bit so that it doesn't just remain unspoken. Because I think that's really where the trouble lies, is not that we're trying to pretend like all this stuff doesn't exist, but rather we should just be open to talking about it when it does come up.
Okay. Ivan, how about you?
Going off of one of the stuff that Kyle and Bernardo had mentioned, something that I taught my girls, every time we go shopping, we talked about pricing and foods and different things. And one of the very first things that I do remember talking to them about was the pink tax, where you've got a male product that is the same thing in a female product, but it's packaged differently by color, and it's priced higher for a woman. So those are some of the things. That's one of the biggest things that come to mind. I'm thinking about this question that is really, really a cultural difference here. And so I've taught my girls how to, look for the things that they need without having to buy it because it's in a pink package. So kind of take the thing apart and try to let them understand, what it is that they're looking at and what our society is trying to present to try to promote everything.
Okay.
Yeah, I can think of one specific example, maybe a couple of years ago with my eldest. So she must have been 8 or 9. And at the beginning of the year, you have all the, they're introduced to all the different activities they can do in school or outside of school. And they handed out these flyers to kids, and they gave flyers of the football team or soccer, to all the boys, and the gymnastics, and I don't know what else, dancing, and what else to the girls. And so I was asking, why didn't you get the football? Oh, well, they gave the football to the boys, and they gave us these ones. So I asked, but are you okay with that? I mean, this is you're entitled to go and play football if you want. And of course, at the point she says, no, that's for the boys. I'm happier with my friends doing dance or whatever. And maybe that's the case as well, but you don't really know at which point the option was made and that the door closed for her. And so that's something that is annoying, because you don't know if maybe she would have been a great football player, or she would have had a lot of fun. But someone at some point decided that we're gonna steer them in that direction. So if nothing else, and indeed obviously then she doesn't want to be the only girl that says no, I want to join the boys team and so on. But at least we have that conversation about, but you realize I understand, and I understand why it's wrong. So I think that some cases where you do need to make it clear that, okay, this is not how it's supposed to work. And if you're upset about it, you should say so, because, because obviously it's not about the football. Well, it is to some extent about the football and the activities, but it's also a lot about what comes afterwards. And if that kind of thing goes unquestioned, then what other kind of stuff will, she said, well, you're just going to have to get 10% less than your colleague, just because that's how it is. Oh yeah, right. I remember that from not being able to play football in school. So I think these kind of things, you hope at least from these small incidents that you at least plan something that then will allow them to identify certain patterns and react to them when they have to face them on their own.
Yeah, it seems that all of you have that concept of you deal with it as it comes up, and you make sure that you discuss it and you understand it as it comes up. So then with the little things, you then understand the big picture.
Yeah.
It seems like seems good, like a good way to.
I mean, there are a few, we do have a few books hanging around strategically left in strategic places for what is feminine. And these are all the famous women from history that you won't probably see in other books. So, there are, we also try, both myself and mother of my girls, we do have these conversations very much, this is wrong, this is what's been happening and it's wrong, and this is feminism and this is what it's about. So we do have those conversations as well. I think there's space and there's room for all these conversations.
Yeah. Right. So as fathers yourselves, I think all three of you only have daughters. Am I right? You don't have sons. Have you ever been guilty of unconscious gender bias and sexist expectations when parenting your daughters? And when did you realize or recognize that some of your parenting methods had this ingrained gender bias in them that may be detrimental to your daughter's development? Let's start with Ivan.
Well, I love to cook. I was raised as an only child, and I always yearned for my mom's cooking. I always went. I went to boarding school from the beginning, and then off to college, and so I had to cook for myself. And so I'm a self-taught cook. I have a little, my own little channel. I do a little amateur cooking and stuff. And so when my daughters were born, obviously I would put them in there. And show them what to do. When we would go to the grocery stores, I would teach them how to pick good fruits and good vegetables and proper way. Whether you have to tap on it, smell it, pull on an ear or something. And then I made sure that they were going to cook, and I wanted to make sure that they would have that same type of experience. And then at some point, I guess when my kids were about 10 or 11 years old, I realized, that is an expectation that society has, that the women should always be the ones that cook. And I realized that's, not exactly the idea that I want them to have. So I started not letting them go into the kitchen anymore. I let them go play, go do other more constructive things, whether they wanted to go play sports or they mostly stuck to arts. They never really did sports, but that's what I let them do. But it was the one thing that I realized that, I love to cook, but that's just me. It's not going to be for my daughters. And it doesn't mean that my daughters have to learn to cook. Thankfully, they know how to cook now, but I wanted to let them understand that that's not something that they have to learn to be in a society.
Okay. Bernardo?
It's a tricky one, because there's probably things that will, in a few years' time, they will come back and say, hey, you did this. So we might organize another session at that point, and I'll I'll let you know what they said. But I think one instinct perhaps that I had to sort of be aware of was around the clothing. When especially my eldest, when she started, I wanted to wear this and wear that, and you kind of think, is that appropriate? Am I thinking too much about this? Is it, to some extent, it's your role as a father to protect her, but at the same time, boys get to wear more or less whatever they want. So what if? But at the same time, you're also, there's so much going on in your head at that point that you're not quite sure. You want to be the cool father as well that says, yeah, go for it, just wear whatever you want. At the same time, you're aware that perhaps other people will look at it and think it's inappropriate.
Yeah, and the world is a dangerous place for girls, so that's
of course. So,
well. Yeah.
But at the same time, it shouldn't be her responsibility to dress modestly, as they say sometimes, because other people might be offended or whatever other reason. So, but at the same time, obviously, if she just wants to go in underwear in the street, you also don't let her. So there's that conversation that you have to have, not just with her, but with yourself, and trying to find a balance there. So I think that can be challenging sometimes. And I'm sure, being 11 and going on to her teens now, I'm sure that that conversation will continue.
Yes. Kyle, your daughter's very young, but have you seen that in yourself?
Yeah, of course. We live in a patriarchal culture. And I have spent 35 years of my life being conditioned in that culture. And so, I shouldn't be surprised when some of that comes up in me in my parenting. No matter how much of my life I dedicate to trying to unlearn those things, it's still there and continues to be socialized in me. And my hope is that won't happen and that I'll expand my consciousness. But there will always be moments. And in terms of how I realize these things, my wife always does a good job of reminding me when I don't realize it myself. So a big thing that comes up for me is around patience and losing my patience. And so the other day we were getting ready for a bike ride, and when you go on an outing with a toddler, you have to have all the things. You have to get the diaper bag and the toys and the food and the snacks and everything. And so it takes some time. And, you know, we were getting all the things together. My wife and I weren't on the same page, and my daughter started crying and fussing. And I lost my temper, and I raised my voice at her. And, you know, my wife said, hey, you know, if you're upset with me, don't take it out on her. And I knew she was right. It wasn't my daughter's fault. It was just the moment and the situation. And then we got on our bikes and headed out, and I spent the entire bike ride just feeling totally guilty and terrible and awful about having yelled at her. And so when we finally got to our destination, you know, I went to the back of the carrier and picked her up, and I just apologized, and I said, hey, listen, you know, Daddy yelled at you, and he shouldn't have done that. That wasn't right, and he's gonna try and not do that from now on when he gets impatient. And for me, again, I think that's the most important part is to not try and have this checklist of things to do and not to do, because I think that is just it's an unrealistic way to parent. It's an unrealistic way to live. But to have the golden rule that when I do make a mistake and I realize that I try and make it better. You know, I try and explain to my daughter that I did make a mistake and that I'll do better next time. And I think, you know, the thing about a patriarchal culture is that it encourages us as men that we don't make mistakes, that we don't own up to those mistakes, and that we try and act like we can do everything by ourselves. And, you know, I just don't think that's a realistic way to live, and it's not a good model to lead for my daughter. And so that's just an example of one of the many mistakes that I make on a day-to-day basis. But again, I think for me, it's about addressing it when it happens.
Okay, you've actually kind of answered my next question, which is what can fathers do to effectively prevent or counteract this culturally ingrained sexism in raising daughters? And you told us what you did. Ivan, what do you do?
Well, I really feel that fathers need to have a community where they can actually share their struggles with one another, and that could give them a glimpse to see where they are at what point in life. I participated in another panel that we talked about masculinity and deconstructing that. You know, wow, you know, our society makes it awkward for, you know, if I'm at the park with my daughter and there's another dad at the park with their child, and, you know, I should be comfortable enough to go to the dad and go, hey, you know, you want to make a play date with your child at some future time. And our culture doesn't do that. It doesn't really allow us to feel comfortable to say something like that. So creating a community where, you know, other fathers can share their struggles and see other viewpoints and listen to other dads as well is something that I think that they should do. You know, and also to have the courage for fathers to do things, to step outside the zone. I stepped out of my zone and I did the PTSA for 9 years. You know, my children weren't really really interested in Girl Scouting, but that would have been something I would have done. I would have immersed myself in doing that. And, you know, those are things that are normally gender for females, and making yourself be part of something like that as a guy, I think is very wide world opening for them. So, and that's one of the reasons why I'm part of the Fathering Together group, because that's one place where I do help other dads. More specifically, I deal with dads who are in that very depressed state of mind, and I try to lift them up and out of there.
All right, Bernardo?
Yeah, I think we're more or less on the same topics here, because I think it is a lot about, you know, stepping out and looking at the whole picture and trying to see how the world looks like in someone else's eyes. And for me, I think that's, I mean, I got a bit of a cheat start because I was raised by a single mother. So from very early on, you get that sort of perspective, that unique perspective. And I think that for me, I think what makes the most difference is just thinking about it and talking to women, reading women as well. It just gives you a whole perspective, a whole different perspective on how you look at life, and how does it look from the other side, which shouldn't even be the other side, but that's what it is, isn't it? So I think for me, it's a lot about educating yourself, reading from all sorts of perspectives, because then you have a much more informed view of what the world is really about. And when you have to make decisions, then that sort of that shapes how the decisions you're going to make, because then you will have a lot more other perspectives in mind. Because, oh, okay, if I do this, then I'm stepping on touching on certain things which are a problem to some people. So just being aware that there's different ways of looking at this issue, that just because you don't feel constrained by certain things doesn't mean that those constraints aren't there. And so for me, it's really just, if anything, that's my in terms of suggestions of how do you deal with this kind of thing, is like Kyle said, having a checklist doesn't really work, because just before you make a decision or you have a chat or say something to your kid, you're not going to go through the checklist and see what's there and what's not. So it's really about just constantly just reading new stuff, interesting stuff that's coming from all sorts of angles. Make that effort to go outside of your comfort zone and of your bubble, and look at the world from different perspectives. That sort of helps you then make much better decisions, I find.
Do you think that it's possible for fathers to raise daughters without any gender bias or sexist expectations? I want to start with Ivan, just because your daughter is the oldest and she's almost an adult. Do you think it's possible?
I think it's possible, but in a very, very uphill battle. I think it would take a very long time to get to where our society will get to that point. And, for me, watching Mary Lou Retton or Simone Biles accomplish, what they do in the Olympics, and then I'm trying to teach my daughter how to, top off the gas on the car or change the tire, so it becomes difficult when we have so many things around us. So to actually step up, I feel like I need to be kind of like, the Mark Anthony and talk to everybody, and then express myself, but I'm like one person in this very large ocean, and if my words fall on deaf ears or not, it's going to be a struggle. I do feel like it's a huge uphill battle to accomplish this.
Okay, Bernardo, do you feel your daughters are still pretty young, but one of them is almost a teenager?
Right. Yeah. So yeah, my one daughter's 17 years old, and she has her own. I've let her pick out her own clothes, from an early age on. So she doesn't wear, dresses and girly things. And it's not exactly as she dresses like a boy either. So she has a very well mixed, and I think because of that's given her a lot of confidence at an early age. And she has that type of confidence now that she's got, a ton of friends that follow her and consider her like a really good role model for them.
That's cool. Bernardo, how about you? Do you think it's possible to raise daughters with no gender bias at all?
Well, you're not the only one raising your daughter. So everyone around you is part of this. The teachers. So even if the two parents are very much on the same page, which is my case as well, I'm very fortunate, of course, and that makes it a lot easier. Then you have the whole society to deal with as well. So I think the trick is just to always keep yourself more or less in check, and just making sure you're on track, and do the best you can, because to a large extent it doesn't depend on you to some extent, I would say, because they spend you spend 8 hours with them per day, maybe there are 8 hours at school. So a lot of it comes down to all sorts of other influences, and obviously that's good. You just need to make sure that you're picking up on signs that maybe, okay, let's talk about this, or let's talk about that, and at the same time making sure that your own influence is a positive one.
Kyle?
I mean, I don't know if it's possible.
You have a lot of time because your daughter's so very young.
Yeah.
Do you think in the future it'll be easier?
And that gives me some hope, I look, I study some of these movements, and I look at history, and it seems like there has been some progress, right? We're sitting on a panel with 3 men talking intelligently about the effects of sexism and patriarchy in society. That is a sign of progress, I think. And at the same time, we're seeing a strong cultural resistance to some of that progress, right? We see political strongmen like Trump and Boris Johnson and movements that they bolstered around white men's sort of aggrieved entitlement, the entitlement that many white men feel they're losing as a result of some of this progress. And so I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I do have a clear vision of the kind of world that I want my daughter to live in. I want my daughter to live in a world where she can be her genuine, authentic self without having to worry or have to live in fear. I want her to live in a world where she loves herself fully and she can share that love with the world. And you know, that world that I envision for her can only happen if we start to build it right now. And so, you know, I don't know if it's possible to raise a daughter without gender bias. I certainly think it's worth trying.
Cool. I'm going to take a break from questions now just to tell the audience, please do ask your own questions. We have a few viewers, but everyone's really quiet, which sometimes happens, but you know, feel free to ask your questions. But okay, so meanwhile, I'll move on. Let's talk about male violence towards women and girls. Now, unfortunately, this happens. We see it in many forms, from domestic violence to rape to men killing women who say no to them. According to the United Nations, 1 in 3 women has or will experience violence perpetrated on them by a male. Here's a double question. What can fathers do to curb male violence against women while equipping their daughters to navigate a world that is still hostile and violent towards women? And society still remains far too steeped in victim blaming and rape culture. Do you think girls should still be taught self-defense, or should change efforts be focused on raising boys to not be violent towards women and girls? Let's go to Ivan first.
Well, the statistic, 1 in 3 women, that I fall exactly into that statistic. So as you heard in the intro at the beginning, I had one daughter that I have recently lost in February. She was murdered. She was shot in the head by another male. And, you know, that threw my reality and my question of a lot of things. And thinking about curbing male violence against women comes down to the difference of being streetwise and being street smart. You know, having theoretical knowledge of what to learn and what to do in a hostile world versus having the knack or the personality and instinct for survival in that hostile world. So it almost consumes the part of having to recognize what the hostility, whether it's going to be something that is in that culture, in the society that they're growing up in. And so, you know, it comes down to, I grew up in Washington Heights, which at that time was the capital of the world, and I never ever touched drugs. I did the best I could to survive. And so the best way that I survived was with my words, knowledge, and equipping our daughters and our sons with knowledge is, I think, the first phase of preventing violence in the world.
Okay. So do you think that knowledge for women then includes self-defense, or should we focus that on boys, teaching boys to not be violent against women and girls?
Yeah, I think the knowledge for girls, in other words, you know, teach them how to communicate and how to de-escalate a situation is what's important. And that, you know, goes for both men and for women. So, you know, the men should learn how to de-escalate or recognize that the situation is getting worse or not. So doing things like, you know, karate classes and, you know, teaching them self-defense and boxing, all that, I think is more of a exercise, not to be used in like on the street or something like that.
Okay. Bernardo, what about you? What do you think fathers can do to curb male violence against women while equipping daughters to navigate a world that is hostile and violent?
It's a tricky one. I really don't have an answer to that. I think, of course, a lot of it comes about, deconstructing patriarchal society and just dismantling all this feeling of entitlement that some men think they need to have, otherwise they don't comply with what is expected of them. So all that work of deconstructing this, I think, will obviously move things in the right direction. I think from my side, in terms of my girls, I think what I try to do them is give them confidence, because I think, again, I don't have firsthand experience with that violence. It's a lot about what I read, about what I see around me, but I don't have that experience. And a lot of it is about that entitlement. A lot of it is about bullying, about simply the fact that he feel that the person, whether it be a man or a woman, but mostly a man, they feel that they can do it because they sense the lack of confidence or the frailty in the other person, and so they know that they can do it because they can get away with it. So to some extent, a lot of, or some of the stuff that I'm concerned about and that I try to equip my girls with is confidence to say what they want to say, to have a voice. So that when it comes to a situation where there is tension and there is this someone that wants to have influence or an upper hand or bully, whatever, then she's in a situation to say, no, back off, or just back away confidently. But you cannot equip, you cannot train them to every specific situation of violence or otherwise conflict that they might come across. So I think for me that, Ivan was talking about knowledge, and I absolutely agree that it's very important. And the other thing I would add to that is confidence and having a voice. I think that hopefully that will sort of be ingredients that then, along with intelligence, that they will then be in a situation, if they're in a situation where they're confronted with violence, that they will have. They will know what to do, and they will have the confidence to do it.
Okay, Kyle?
Yeah, so folks might be familiar with the phrase hurt people hurt people. Yeah, so basically it's just this idea that when people commit acts of violence or harm, it generally comes from a place of pain and suffering, right? And so I think if we can understand this concept, I think we can begin to start solving the problem of violence against women. Men need to heal from the pain that we experience. And particularly, I think we experience pain from living in a culture that disconnects us from our emotions, from feelings, from the ability to love and experience love. And so it might sound kind of woo-woo and a little out there, but really I think that if we're going to get to the root of this problem, it's about us as men learning how to love.
You're talking about toxic masculinity, which hurts men because they're not allowed to express their emotions in a constructive way. They in the end, and they end up resorting to violence. So then I would assume you believe that the change efforts should be focused on raising boys to not be violent against women and, to be able to express themselves appropriately.
Absolutely. I think if we're going to get to the root cause of some of these problems, I think we have to look at the ways in which our culture has trained us as men to default to positions of dominance, and assuming that men are inherently better than women. And, self-defense, I think, is a notoriously bad way to go about solving some of these problems because it's a short-term solution, and you cannot control for what other people are going to do. At the same time, I'm currently reading Hunger by Roxane Gay, and she tells the story of her own experience of violence. And, I also really appreciate sort of her pragmatic approach in saying, yes, we want to attack these sort of long-term systemic issues, and we have to live in the world that we currently live in now. which means we have to survive. And sometimes that means we have to defend ourselves. And so I don't necessarily think self-defense is a bad thing. It just shouldn't be the only thing. And I think that the other thing that we should be doing is looking to address the way that patriarchal dominance influences the way that boys and men think about dominance over women and detachment from our own feelings and emotions.
Okay. Yeah, interesting. Bernardo, do you agree with that?
No, definitely. No, absolutely. I think, another thing like Kyle said, it will be a long and cumbersome, long process. And it's not, so it is really having a sort of a mix of tools and trying to equip them with as much as we can. So that's, but like you said, karate, yes, absolutely. If it fills them with confidence, it gives them all sorts of other things. So by all means, and it may become important at one specific situation. But if that's your whole strategy, then obviously you're not going to go very far because you're not addressing the problem.
Okay, cool. Ivan, did you have something to add, or did I not? Okay, all right. I thought I saw you wave. Okay, so let's move on to the conversation about consent. So understanding the importance of consent and bodily autonomy, especially when it comes to sexual and reproductive consent, is one of the most important conversations you could have with your daughters. How do you talk to your daughters about bodily autonomy and consent, and when do you start? Let's go with Bernardo.
I think you start with, you can start from very early age. I played particularly with them quite a lot. And I think it's quite, sometimes they're saying, no, stop, and laughing. And you kind of go, okay, you stop and you say, you want to stop? I'm sure. No, more. Okay. But then you sort of say, and you sort of, you go the extra step and say, okay, but you said stop, so I'm stopping. You say, no, more. Okay. And then you can have that conversation already at quite an early age. And, you don't have the conversation, but you sort of said, okay, stop is stop. And so that's one way that, I think that perhaps instinctively you sort of go, okay, you're setting the mark. So, you're setting the grounds and the rules. So that's fine. And then, of course, at the later stage, then you can have a more elaborate conversation about, I don't know, something that happened at school or whatever. And then you ask, how do you feel about it? Because, it's your body and so, unfortunately, a few years ago in my daughter's schools, there was an incident where one of the people that worked at school was accused of inappropriate touching one of the other girls, one of the other kids at school, and so that sort of triggered the conversation that perhaps we didn't want to have so early on, but that then you start to that's when you have that conversation and you have the conversation then and there. So. I think it's, it varies and you just have to sort of adapt to whatever. But I think my point was that, even from innocent play, you can already help them understand that there are boundaries and, that it's important that you stick to those boundaries.
Okay. Kyle?
Yeah, I think obviously consent is an incredibly important conversation. And for me, it really starts with my own self-awareness about how I understand and practice consent in my own life. And obviously having conversations about getting consent to give a hug or a kiss, it's a really good place to start. And we need to be doing that. But it has to be more than that, right? It has to be about sort of thinking about consent in every part of life. So my daughter, like I said, she's 20 months old, and we go on walks in the neighborhood all the time. She loves to go on walks. And one of the things that she's really getting curious about is other people's houses and other people's yards. So she really wants to walk up to other people's houses and play with their lawn ornaments and pick their flowers from their garden and that sort of thing. And it's just incredibly difficult to try and get her to not do that because she doesn't yet understand the concept of boundaries, right? She doesn't understand the idea of property and the idea of boundaries. So I'm trying to have these conversations with her, and I realize that it's a very similar conversation to the conversation about consent, right? So we do the same tickling thing that Bernardo was talking about, right? And we've talked with her a little bit about how if she doesn't want to be tickled, she can say no, right? And so I tried to sort of use that as a way to also talk about boundaries with other people's yards. So saying, just like you can tell somebody no that you don't want to be tickled, if somebody doesn't want you to come into their yard, they can also say no. And you have to ask permission before you can go to somebody's yard and pick their flowers and play with their lawn ornaments. So, even though my daughter is very young, I do think it's important to start having these kinds of conversations really early. And it shouldn't just be about sort of physical touch and intimacy, but of course those things are important. It needs to be about the ways in which we think about, consent and permission in all parts of life. And again, for me, it's really about the ways that I understand that and practice that in my own life. If I didn't tell her that she had to ask permission to go into the neighbor's lawn, that would seem contradictory to her. Like sometimes you have to ask for consent and sometimes you don't. And that doesn't seem like it matters here. And so maybe it doesn't matter. And so I think part of that starts with me and paying attention to the times where my own entitlement comes out, when I just assume that I have access to something or that I don't have to ask permission for something, and becoming more and more conscious of the ways in which that entitlement plays out in the way that I raise my daughter. So again, self-awareness and self-confidence is huge.
Okay. Ivan, how about you?
Well, I feel that body autonomy starts with the basic doctor's visit. So as you're raising your daughter, this is what I would suggest, kind of a suggestion for dads as well. They're used to mom and dad, tickling them, like Bernardo talked about, and playing with them and teach them body parts and all that. Then the very next person that is going to be touching their body is going to be more than likely a doctor. And so that's where I think the conversation starts, and you start letting your daughter know, hey, it's okay for a doctor to touch your body. You should always make sure that, if anybody's going to touch your body, that they're asking for permission. All doctors do that. And I remember one time when my daughter was feeling very sick. I think she was like 7 or 8 years old, and and they take her into the back, and I'm in the waiting room, and the nurse comes back, and she's like, she wants to make sure that she has your permission for the doctor to touch her. So, and I think that really did a really good job of raising awareness of body autonomy, making sure that they are aware of who can touch them and how they should be touched, so that they're more transparent when they're communicating, and even when they get into a situation. I think that can avoid a situation that can become sexually abusive in the future as well.
Those are good tips. Any more specific tips that anyone wants to add for any dads out there who want to talk to their daughters about this kind of thing, but no idea where to begin? No, covered it all.
It's I don't have any specifics. Again, I think I go back constantly to the same thing, which is I want to make sure that they have a voice, that they know that they can speak. I was watching the other day the documentary about of Michelle Obama. What's it called now? I forgot the name. Becoming, I think it's called. So, so she has the book, and there's the documentary now on Netflix. And I was watching it, and it was interesting how she was saying, the kitchen table. She was saying that the kitchen table for her was the place where she knew she had a voice, and that marked her. And I think that's she's absolutely right. If you make sure that your daughters and your sons have a voice in the family, and what they said is being listened to and it's important, they go out in the world and they expect the same thing. They're not gonna, if someone says, "Oh no, you're saying no, but that's not really important," and I want them to be confident and say, "No, I'm saying no, so back off. So I'm saying this, and you should listen to me." So I think all this work around, from very early age, just feeling that, making sure that they feel that when they talk, that it's important that people listen and pay attention to what they're saying. That's give them a certain confidence that then makes it easier for other things than to build other blocks on top of that.
Okay. All right, so we've come to the section for tips and ideas and suggestions. Do you have any particular tips and suggestions for fathers or fathers-to-be who want to raise empowered daughters who are equipped to handle sexism and misogyny? Who wants to go first? Ivan?
I feel like the best tip that I can give dads out there, parents, you got to know yourself first. You got to know what is around you. You have to be aware of what sexism is and misogyny, and really understand that and see what the examples we have in the world. And as you're raising your daughter, you will know when the time is right to talk to your daughter about these things, to teach them properly how to do it. The one thing I would say is, like, if your daughter's already in her teens and you haven't had that conversation, then now's the time to do it, because you got to do it. But definitely before the teenage years, you need to talk to your daughters, but you also need to be aware yourself so that you are passing on the best ways that they can defend themselves, they can talk to other people, they can have those conversations. I think your own personality will dictate the route that your daughter will take, regardless of what you put for
her. Bernardo?
It's a hard one. I mean, it's yeah. I mean, for me, it's I'm repeating myself a bit, but it's really about making sure that you know what it's like, because if you're a man growing up in a patriarchal society and don't think, I guess just make sure you step out a little bit outside of your bubble and of your comfort zone, and just read a lot. Just read whatever comes your way that you find that helps you understand other perspectives in life. And like I said, I was growing up with a single mother, and she was reading a lot of feminist stuff, and not necessarily theory, but a lot of women authors that talked about women's lives. And I feel that, reading that stuff at the time, Isabel Allende, all sorts of, it doesn't have to be hardcore feminist literature or theory. Just letting literature help you experience what women's lives are like, and that goes for everything. What Black people's lives are like, what Jewish people's lives are like, what Arabs' lives are like. That gives you a whole different perspective and equips you to just make sure that also your kids are also aware that there's more to the world and there's more to life than just our in my case, white man's perspective, living in a white city and so on. So for me, the advice is just just read whatever you think might enrich your own perspective of the world, and try to pass it on to your kids.
Kyle?
Yeah, so I think for me, one of the biggest lessons that I've learned in fatherhood so far is to let my daughter lead. So that for me, that means really trying to get out of her way, to be the person that she is and that she's meant to become, and then also to see her as my teacher. So I talk about this all the time, how I really truly believe that my daughter is my greatest teacher. And we're sort of raised in this way to believe that children are sort of blocks of wood to be shaped by their parents, right? And I think that can sometimes set up this dynamic where children expect the world to sort of run like this, right? There are people who sort of have the answers and the power, and those who don't. And especially for young girls and women, they're trained to be socialized in that way, to be subordinate and to be subordinate to men. And so for me, one thing that I'm really trying to do is to counteract that, to turn that on its head, like Bernardo said, by letting my daughter lead, by letting her be the one who kind of dictates the way that we play together, and not just take the lead on things, but really feel like I have something to learn from the way that my daughter just naturally exists in the world. She's this beautiful, amazing person person, and I get to witness her, and I get to witness that beauty. And so there's just so much to learn there, and so much to grow and experience from that. So that would be my biggest piece of advice, would be just to say, let them lead, and see them as teachers.
Okay. I'm curious about something. I would imagine that some people would think that these conversations about consent, sexism, feminism in general might be left to mothers to have with their daughters. What do you think about this? Let's go with Kyle first, and then we'll go backwards.
Yeah, I think when we think that sexism is a women's issue, it ends up being just a really problematic situation for everybody. So for me, like paternity leave is a really great example of this,
Okay.
right? So lately, in the past few years, there's been a big movement from men to advocate for paternity leave. And part of this is because men are starting to realize that being an active parent is really good for their children, it's good for their family, and it's good for them, right? But the reason why we don't have paternity leave already established is because we sort of already built into our patriarchal culture that men are the ones who go to work and women are the ones who stay home with the children. And so when we talk about paternity leave as like an issue, it's actually a feminist issue, because it's addressing a symptom of patriarchy that we as men helped establish that is now hurting us. It's like a tangible way that we're realizing that patriarchy holds us back from living the kind of lives that we want to live. And so when we see feminism as just a women's issue, not only is it just putting the responsibility on all the responsibility on women who already experience oppression from sexism already and have to fight to survive that every day, but it also ignores the ways in which those systems hurt us as men. And it doesn't acknowledge the ways that we as men hold positions of power and authority in society and can leverage those positions of power and authority to make change. And so, yeah, I think men have a huge role to play in these conversations, and in a way that's not just out of the goodness of our heart, but that's really in the best interest of everybody, including men.
Okay. Bernardo?
What Cal said.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I think it's also, for me, it's a very important pillar and elements of my daughter's life. So why would I not be involved in that? I go and see the dance rehearsals and whatever, because I want to be part of that. So I want to be part of this as well. So for me, it's to some extent instinctive. And the other thing as well is, I usually say it on more of a joking tone. It's perhaps, perhaps now it shows a little bit the patriarchal influence. But I usually say, well, if I want to make the life real difficult for whatever boys or girls she's going to meet. Because if you're if you're a man that is attentive to this kind of issues and that thinks these things are important, it will sort of limit or at least condition how they will, what kind of stuff they will look for men in the future. And so you want to, that's one way of looking at it. I think the other way is indeed just to make sure that also that this part of their education is again coming from different perspectives, and that's that these kind of concerns are, hopefully that they will look for this in the people that they relate to in the future. And if someone does have incredibly sexist attitudes, it will be a big no-no in terms of letting those people into their lives, or at least doing it very carefully, because obviously that is probably often symptomatic of other things which probably you have to be careful with.
Right, understand. Ivan?
So having both parents talk to the child, I think, is important. In a perfect world, you would have both parents sit down and talk to the daughter about sexism and misogyny and all those other issues, but that doesn't happen. So what needs to occur is communication between the parents. Hey, today I had a talk with our daughter. I guess you talk to your to your partner, and you let them know, hey, we spoke about this. Maybe you want to go in and talk a little bit more. Maybe you have more, more insight into other aspects that I may not have. So having the communication between the parents, so that they can communicate that to the daughter, I think it's a job for both, not just one parent to do.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll definitely second that. And as a divorced parent, we do it a lot. Luckily, I have quite a good relationship with my daughter's mother, and we're constantly conspiring behind their backs through WhatsApp or chatting, just saying, this happened, and I said this, just so you are aware, and we want to add another layer to that. So yeah, definitely a two-person job.
Okay. All right. So we've come to our last question. More tips. Do you have any particular tips or suggestions for fathers and fathers to be out there who are aware that they need to consciously parent their daughters to become independent and empowered people, but are finding it difficult to get motivated about it or to change their parenting habits? Who shall we start with? Kyle.
Sure. Yeah. So, I think if you're finding difficulty being motivated to care about these kinds of issues, just as Bernardo said, read some different perspectives about women who have experienced violence. That's a really good motivator for me, because knowing that is a world that my daughter is going to live in. That's really motivating for me to want to change that world, because I don't want her to experience those things. And then the other thing that I would say is practicing mindfulness has been huge for me. So we've talked a lot about self-awareness and becoming more aware of the ways in which we perpetuate this stuff, and mindfulness has really just been a really helpful tool for me to be able to choose patience over frustration and anger, to choose humility over sort of control and wanting to be in charge, choosing vulnerability over disconnection from my emotions and from my family, and choosing to listen rather than just explain or be in charge all the time. So mindfulness is a really powerful tool, and anybody can do it, right? And anybody can stop and become more aware of what's happening around them, and listening to your breath, listening to your body, and listening to the people in your life, including your daughter and the women in your life.
Bernardo?
I would definitely second all that. And perhaps what I would say, if that doesn't work, is think of the alternative. Think of what it's like to be completely unequipped to deal with those kind of issues, and find yourself in a violent relationship and not being able to spot that this is an issue, and not having the tools just to deal with it and to leave, or to address it in whatever way that needs addressing. So I think thinking you want to make sure your child has a good education and good principles to have a good life and all that. This is definitely part of that conversation as well, and shouldn't be left as something that it's a huge blind spot if you don't. I would say that's the way to put it.
Okay, Ivan.
Tips and suggestions may come when it's too late. So you have to remind yourself on a daily basis that you are the example that they are going to learn from. Whether you're going to pick up that book on feminism, you're going to pick up this type of clothing. They're going to learn from you. You turn your head away for a minute, and they're going to notice that. So always stay focused and stay resolved about what you want to teach your daughter. And if things get worse, you are always going to fall into fear. And the way that I look at fear is you're going to face everything and rise, or you're going to forget everything and run. And that's actually the acronym for fear. And what I would always suggest is to face everything and rise.
Okay, that's good advice. All right, so that actually brings us to the end of our discussion. So before we sign off, I want to just say thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panel, Ivan, Bernardo, and Kyle, for giving us such amazing insights and great answers. Thanks to the audience. And I actually have a few resources to share. So let's see if I can manage to share a slide with everyone. Here we go. Okay, there it is. So if you want to find out more about violence against women, you can, and what you can do about it, please do visit the Pixel Project's website, www.thepixelproject.net. And we have more panel sessions coming up in the Fathers for Pixels program that's on the website as well. Our moderator, chat box moderator, will be putting up all these links in the chat box for you to just click. Please do go and learn more about the work that our partners are doing. Men Challenging is at www.menchallenging.com. And Fathering Together has really great programs. Please do visit www.fatheringtogether.org. Yeah, so there are a lot of resources out there for you to learn and discuss and talk about and see if you can change your communities and yourselves. All right, so the last thing is, do any one of you have any announcements, any interesting things coming up?
Yeah, so speaking of Fathering Together, just earlier this month, we published our first book through Fathering Together. It's called Fathering Stories, Volume 1. Myself and Ivan are both contributing authors to the book, and the book is really just all about the extraordinary adventure of fatherhood from the perspective of ordinary dads. And so we're trying to celebrate fatherhood and share some of the wisdom and knowledge that dads have learned through the adventure of fatherhood. And so we're trying to let people know about that in time for Father's Day, which is tomorrow. So the book's available on Amazon and pretty much everywhere that you can find ebooks. It's a quick read. You can read it in less than 2 hours. And we're pretty much giving it away for free. So check it out on Amazon. Again, it's called Fathering Stories, Volume 1. Yeah, and we hope to check it out.
Okay, thanks. All right, so thank you, everybody. And I would say to everyone, good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.